What do you do when the country you just signed a peace deal with contradicts every major commitment made at the negotiating table within 72 hours of signing? That is not a hypothetical question. That is exactly what happened this week between the United States and Iran. And what makes this story so significant is not just the lie itself. It is the fact that this particular lie strikes at the single most important element of the entire peace framework: the nuclear program, the reason this war started, the reason 117 days of fighting, blockades, drone strikes, and diplomatic marathons happened in the first place. If Iran will not allow nuclear inspectors in, then nothing else in the deal actually matters. Let me take you back to Monday, June 21st. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is standing at the Bergenstock Resort on Lake Lucerne in Switzerland, surrounded by Pakistani and Qatari mediators, having just completed an 80-minute face-to-face session with Iran's chief negotiator Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Vance walks out and tells reporters something extraordinary. He says Iran has agreed to invite International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors back into their country. He calls it a major milestone for the American people. He says it is the first step in permanently denuclearizing Iran. He says communications with the IAEA could happen as soon as Monday. He stands there with the full authority of the Vice Presidency of the United States and announces to the world that Iran's nuclear facilities will once again be open to international inspection. 24 hours later, Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei stands before reporters in Tehran and says the opposite. There are no plans for IAEA inspectors to examine Iran's nuclear facilities. No meeting with IAEA Director General Grossi took place in Switzerland. No new commitments on nuclear monitoring were made. No schedule exists. And for good measure, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi goes on social media and says these issues will only be settled within the framework of a final agreement and only after sanctions are fully terminated first. The same delegation that sat across from Vance for 80 minutes in Switzerland, the same people who shook hands and posed for photographs, came home and told their own state media, their own parliament, and the world that none of what Washington said happened. If you are watching this channel for the first time, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. What you are watching unfold in real time is not a minor diplomatic disagreement. It is a structural test of whether the peace framework signed on June 17th by Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian is a genuine agreement or a ceasefire dressed up in deal language. The answer to that question will determine whether the Strait of Hormuz stays open, whether 440 kilograms of Iranian uranium enriched to 60% purity remains inside Iran indefinitely, and whether the global economy gets the genuine relief it has been waiting for since February 28th. Stay with us. Let us understand exactly why the IAEA inspection dispute matters so much by starting with what the IAEA actually is and what it needs to do. The International Atomic Energy Agency is the United Nations nuclear watchdog. It is the only independent body authorized to physically inspect nuclear facilities, measure uranium stockpiles, verify enrichment levels, and confirm whether a country is building weapons or running a civilian program. Without IAEA inspectors on the ground in Iran, there is no independent verification of anything Iran says about its nuclear program. And Iran has given the world very specific reasons not to simply take its word. Since Israel launched its 12-day war against Iran in June 2025, the IAEA has been blocked by Tehran from visiting the enrichment sites damaged in those strikes. A full year of blocked access. The agency cannot currently exercise its rights or fulfill its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty for Iran's enrichment sites. IAEA Director General Grossi said this explicitly. The agency cannot verify the suspension of all uranium enrichment in Iran. It cannot confirm the current status of the 440.9 kilogram stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% purity. That is the world's largest accumulation of near-weapons-grade material outside declared nuclear states. And right now, nobody outside Iran knows with certainty where all of it is. Non-proliferation experts have expressed a specific concern this week that deserves direct attention. Iran may be moving its enriched uranium stockpile while IAEA inspectors are blocked. Moving material between sites, dispersing it, or placing portions of it in locations that were not previously declared. This is not idle speculation. It is the reason the additional protocol, which allows for surprise inspections at undeclared sites, was considered a non-negotiable element of any credible nuclear deal. Without it, Iran can declare compliance while physically preparing for something else entirely. The IAEA itself has noted that Iran is the only country in the world with uranium enriched to 60% purity that does not have a weapons program. Every other nation that has ever enriched to that level was building a weapon. Iran maintains this is for peaceful civilian purposes. That claim has never been independently verified at current enrichment levels. Now let us go directly to Trump's response, because it is one of the most direct presidential statements about Iran's credibility since the war began. When reporters told Trump that Iran had denied agreeing to inspections, he said they are wrong. They know they are wrong. He accused Tehran of making false statements. And then he said something that matters enormously for the fragility of this entire framework. He said if Iran had not agreed to inspections, he would cut off talks with Tehran immediately. Read those words carefully. Cut off talks immediately. The 60-day negotiating window that began with the June 17th signing, the window during which the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to remain open, the window during which Iran is supposed to receive sanctions relief and frozen asset access, could be ended by Trump unilaterally if he concludes Iran lied about nuclear inspections. Iran's denial directly puts the entire framework at risk of collapse before the first technical meeting on the nuclear file has even concluded. Here is where this connects to your life in a way that goes beyond geopolitics. Oil is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz again. On June 18th alone, 25 verified commercial vessel crossings were recorded, the highest single-day count since April 18th, more than 5 times the daily average from the first 10 days of June. By June 21st, 93 vessels had transited in 3 days, compared to 32 in a 3-day period just before the MOU was signed. Trump stood at the Mack truck plant in Pennsylvania and called it an oil gusher. He said 19 million barrels of oil flowed out of the Strait of Hormuz in a single day, the most in the waterway's history. Those numbers matter to you. Every barrel of oil flowing through Hormuz is a barrel that was not flowing during 117 days of war. Every vessel that transits is cargo, goods, and energy that was stranded. The price relief at petrol pumps that everyone has been waiting for is directly connected to those 93 vessels crossing freely. But if Trump cuts off talks because Iran lied about nuclear inspections, the ceasefire framework that keeps those ships moving comes under immediate threat. Subscribe right now if you want to follow every development in this story. The next 60 days will determine whether this deal holds or collapses, and every single development matters to global energy markets, to your cost of living, and to whether a new round of military operations begins. Now let us look at J.D. Vance's exact response, because it tells you something important about how Washington is processing this contradiction. Vance stood before reporters and said when Iran engages in what he called trash talk, they cannot expect the President of the United States not to respond and correct the record. He defended Trump's aggressive social media posts warning Iran, including the threat to hit Iran very hard again, only harder if it did not stop its Hezbollah proxies in Lebanon. He acknowledged that Tehran threatened to walk out of the Switzerland talks, but said the foundation laid was successful. And critically, Vance confirmed that Tehran had invited IAEA inspectors, framing Iran's public denial as political posturing for domestic consumption rather than a genuine reversal of commitments made in the room. This is the interpretive gap at the center of the entire crisis. The U.S. says Iran made commitments privately at the negotiating table. Iran says publicly that it made no such commitments. Both cannot be right. And in diplomacy, what matters for implementation is not what was said in a Swiss resort meeting room, but what can be verified publicly, written into binding language, and enforced by an independent third party. The MOU signed on June 17th does not set a time frame for IAEA inspections. It says only that all matters relating to Iran's enrichment program will be agreed as part of a final deal. That language gives Iran enormous flexibility to delay, defer, and redefine what it agreed to without technically violating the text of the MOU. The IAEA's own position adds another layer of complexity. Director General Grossi confirmed at the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan that inspections are going to happen. He said the MOU says explicitly that nuclear activities relating to Iran's nuclear material and facilities will be supervised by the IAEA in all letters. He said obviously the agency will have to inspect to do that. But he also said whether this happens in 2 days, 1 week, or 10 days, it is important but not essential. The timing is not the fundamental issue. The issue is that it is going to happen. Grossi is essentially saying the commitment exists in the MOU text regardless of what Iran's foreign ministry spokesman says in a press conference. But Iran's deputy foreign minister shot back directly at Grossi on social media, saying Iran did not even meet with him in Switzerland, and that these issues will only be examined and settled within the framework of a final agreement, and only after the other party takes practical action to terminate all sanctions first. Sanctions first. That is Iran's actual position, stated directly. Inspections only after sanctions are lifted. The United States' position is inspections first, or at minimum inspections in parallel with sanctions relief. This is the same fundamental gap that has existed in every round of negotiations between Washington and Tehran for the past 3 years. The JCPOA that Trump withdrew from in 2018 resolved this by providing sanctions relief incrementally as Iran met verification milestones. That framework took 2 years of detailed negotiation to construct. The current 60-day window is expected by analysts to produce only a general framework, not a complete solution. Charles Kupchan, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, told Al Jazeera there is no way Washington and Tehran can finalize a deal in 60 days. He said both sides might simply run out the clock by continuing negotiations and keeping Hormuz open without reaching a binding final agreement before the midterm elections make Trump's political calculus even more complicated. Here's the piece of this story that nobody is discussing loudly enough. Iran is believed to store enough highly enriched uranium to build as many as 10 nuclear weapons should it choose to do so. 10. That estimate has been made by multiple non-proliferation experts based on the 440.9 kilogram stockpile at 60% enrichment. The MOU calls for Iran's uranium to be downblended from highly enriched levels. Downblending means reducing the concentration from 60% to a lower level unsuitable for weapons use. But downblending has to be verified. The IAEA has to physically measure the material before, during, and after downblending to confirm it actually happened and that none of the material was diverted. Without inspectors on the ground at the damaged enrichment sites in Isfahan, Fordow, and Natanz, downblending cannot be verified. And without verified downblending, the central nuclear commitment of the entire deal remains unconfirmed. Iran can say it is complying. The world has no way to know. Iran's military has also made statements this week that cut directly against the de-escalatory framework of the MOU. General Ahmad Reza Portistan, head of Iran's Army Strategic Studies and Research Center, announced publicly that Tehran has moved away from a purely defensive posture and now includes preemptive operations in its military strategy. He said Iran could severely surprise the enemy if national interests required it, and added that much of the country's military capability has yet to be used. A military commander announcing offensive doctrine shifts on state media in the same week that Iran's diplomats are denying nuclear commitments made at the negotiating table is not a coincidence. It is a coordinated message. The IRGC and the Iranian military establishment are signaling to their own domestic constituency that this deal was not a concession, it was a strategic pause. Iran's parliament speaker Ghalibaf, who personally led the Swiss negotiations, has already called the Islamabad MOU a declaration of America's defeat on Iranian television. He said the agreement was not the result of pressure, but of Iranian resistance and authority. Think about what that means for the 60-day negotiating process. The man who shook hands with Vance in Switzerland and whose delegation is supposed to be negotiating the nuclear file during this window is simultaneously telling Iranian state television that Washington capitulated. The technical teams working on sanctions relief, uranium disposition, and monitoring protocols are operating under a chief negotiator who has publicly framed the deal as an American defeat. That framing is not just domestic political theater. It is a signal to Iranian hardliners that any concession on the nuclear file will be politically toxic, regardless of what was agreed in Switzerland. The Senate's War Powers Resolution, passed 50-48 just days ago, adds another pressure variable to an already unstable situation. Trump called it poorly timed and meaningless, accused the Senate of providing aid and comfort to the enemy, and said he will get it done one way or the other. The resolution directs the president to remove military forces from the conflict and requires congressional approval for future operations. It is symbolic, not binding. But its passage tells Iran something specific. It tells Tehran that a portion of Washington's own legislature is actively working to constrain the military option that gives Trump his negotiating leverage. Iran's strategic calculation going into the nuclear talks is therefore, we have 60 days of sanctions relief, the Hormuz is open, the Americans are fighting with their own Congress, and the inspectors we denied are not coming before a final deal anyway. Why concede anything now? The question sitting over every diplomatic meeting for the rest of this week is not whether Iran agreed to inspections. Vance says yes, Iran says no, Grossi says they are coming regardless. The real question is whether the 60-day window produces enough concrete progress on the nuclear file to justify keeping the MOU alive, or whether the accumulation of contradictions, including inspection denials, offensive doctrine announcements, Hormuz closure threats, and domestic narratives about American defeat, reaches a threshold where Trump decides the deal is not working and the military option comes back on the table. He has already said he would cut off talks immediately over the inspection lie. He has already warned Iran's president to watch what he says or face consequences harder than before. The ships are flowing through Hormuz today. Whether they flow through Hormuz 60 days from now depends entirely on what happens in the next few weeks between two governments that are telling the world two completely different versions of the same negotiation. A weapon you cannot inspect is a secret you have not given up. And a deal built on secrets is not a deal. It is a delay. What do you think happens next? Comment A if you believe Trump follows through and cuts off talks within the week because Iran continues to deny the inspection commitment. Comment B if you believe the IAEA finds a way to begin inspections quietly, Iran accepts privately while denying publicly, and the deal holds together. Comment C. If you believe Iran is deliberately running out the clock, keeping the sanctions relief an open strait while never making a genuine nuclear concession, and this entire framework collapses before the 60-day window closes.